So, with the cascade, we've got a retaining sort of foundation wall of stonework here, onto which the spilled stone, that's this stone here, which is the final pour into the pond, sits. And then either side of that, you've got two edging stones. It's these edging stones which I always find the most challenging aspect of the cascade, because this is the bit that you're really looking at initially, and I always want to make sure that these edging stones look right. I always look for very particular shapes so that the inside face of the rock on both sides will kind of marry up with the pathway that I want the water to take. Aesthetically, I find having the two edging stones of a similar kind of height always works nicely as well, although of course in nature that's not always the case, but that tends to work nicely, I find, with cascades. In this particular case, there's a natural kind of slope on the land around here. This side of the garden is a lot higher than this side, and everything just gradually slopes down this way. There's a bit of a slope on the stone here that I want to emulate with all this side of the cascade, so I can get away, I think, with some of the rock work this side being just a little bit lower. That's going to tie in with that natural slope. There's a few tricks when you're building cascades, particularly when you're building them like this with foam rather than with concrete or cement, which is a little bit more waterproofing. And that's a few careful folds in the pond liner to ensure that the water is being directed where you want it to go. The foam helps, that's going to block up lots of gaps and direct water, the majority of the water, this way, but ensuring that you've got a nice fold of pond liner here and over that side, and tucked up so it's high just up to the top of the spill stone like this. That creates a bit of a pool here, and it ensures that all of the water is directed in this direction over the spill stone and not disappearing around any stonework around the edge. Now the main pond liner is coming up behind all this stone, underneath the spill stone, and stops up here. And then the cascade liner is overlaid on top of that and is coming down underneath the spill stone and behind all of this rock work, to make sure we've got a good overlapping join, so that if there is any water that spills over the side of the spill stone, it's still going to run down and work its way back into the pond and not leak out. You've got to make sure that you've got a big enough piece of pond liner to be able to create these folds and creases, because of course as I'm doing this I'm shortening the length of that liner, so always go bigger than you think you need. You can always then trim it and cut it back afterwards. So we have got a suitable side stone on the cascade over here. I'm very happy with that, with the slope and the shape of this inward face here, how it's just sitting on the spill stone but not weighting it down with a little gap that I can conceal with a few stones. But this is considerably higher than the rest of the stonework that continues around the pond. Now I would usually like to try to keep the cascade and the spill stones and the edging stones a uniform height or even lower than the edging stone, so it looks like the falls are dropping into the pool. But obviously here, with this slope and the way the lie of the land, that's not possible. So we need to fill this gap up with a couple of stones or a really big rock. And we've been scratching our head trying to find something that we like, until we noticed this beast of a rock concealed in all the undergrowth. Up you get, Dave. It's a lovely big stone. I think that in here is going to set that off nicely, but bloody hell is it heavy. So we're going to have a hell of a time trying to move that by hand, but we're going to give it a go. No swearing. Do. Where's the gloves? Over there. Oh dear, oh dear. I need my steel toe cap gloves. So, I reckon we've got this up, both of us swing that around, we put a rock here so that as it sits on it, if we were to drop it, it's going to protect our fingers. That'll be perfect. Okay.
Don't need my help, do you?
I do.
I've got nothing there at all. Right.
So we're just going to spin it around over there, okay?
Yeah.
On 3, 1, 2, 3.
No, not. No, that way.
Okay. On 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, I like it in that position. It's heavy. What have we got there? Is that concrete? Is that stone? There might be a bit of concrete on there that needs to be knocked off. Now it's a shame, this inward face would look nice with that curve, but I agree, those steps would look nice step down to the pond edge. And I think at the moment I'm leaning more towards the steps. So this end will spin it all the way around.
If it's still got a curve.
It has got a bit of a curve, yeah. Have we got any rocks underneath it again to save our fingers?
A bit bigger, mate. Yeah, this one there.
Bloody hell, it is heavy, isn't it? On 3, 1, 2, 3. Just keep going this way. On 3, 1, 2, 3. Success. We managed to break that. No, we managed to move that without breaking any toes or fingers or knackering our back. And what's nice is that the cascade lining is going to fit between these two stones and tuck up and get concealed there nicely, which means that the cascade lining is significantly higher than the highest point of the water, which is the spill stone. So that ensures that nothing can leak. Now this needs a bit of wedging and propping up underneath, foaming into place. We've got to build up a lot of earth around here. I don't like the fact that this stone sticks up way above ground level as it does. It wants to look like it's protruding out of the ground. But very quickly the ground slopes up over here. So we can just bring that slope down a little bit further, and that will transition nicely. Tell you what, it's not feeling cold today. Got used to all that sunshine this week. Right, I've basically built the bones, the structure of the cascade. And I'm at the stage now where I want to start to foam these into place so I can complete the very end section with the inlet pipe to the top of the falls. Having started with the spill stone and the two side stones, I've sort of worked my way up. I've got a secondary sort of stone here, so we've got one little fall and then the main fall dropping into the pond. I mean, this is a nice simple affair. It's nothing too complex. There's no hidden pools and it's not disappearing off into the horizon. It's just a little cascade. This is going to be the inlet pipe that I shall foam into place over here. But now I need to start filling all these voids to make sure that, one, the rocks are fixed into position, but perhaps more importantly, it's to make sure that all the water, or as much water as possible, runs over the stonework and not in between all the cracks and under the stone. Now, finishing off, this is where the importance of that little fold of pond liner I mentioned previously. Obviously the bulk of the pond liner is coming underneath and behind all of these stones, entering the pond around the edges. But I don't want any water to percolate amongst all the cracks and bits and pieces around the sides. I want it all to flow down the centre of this stone. So this secondary fold that I added, which comes up here and comes up the side here, higher than what will be maximum water level, means that almost all of the water is going to be directed over this final spill stone and pour into the pond. Now it's a messy game playing around with the foam gun, so I'm going to put my waders on and my long gloves and then crack on. Well, good morning. It's a Monday morning, Friday afternoon. We finished off completing the construction of the cascade here and just getting everything foamed into place. and I was desperate to give it a test run Friday afternoon, but I wanted to make sure the foam had a decent period to really go off properly before I ran it. So this morning is the first time I've switched the pump on and seen it flowing. And without having to do any adjustments, I'm really pleased with how the flow is travelling over these stones. It's filled both of these spill stones, particularly the bottom stone, beautifully. Very central, which is what you always want to try and achieve. And this stone was a little bit tricky. The stone itself had a couple of raised areas that, if I set that stone completely level, it was unlikely that the water was going to pour over that smoothly. So to kind of counteract and offset this raised section, I set that stone a little bit off level, and that's worked really well. So I'm very pleased with that. Now, I've sort of given the liner a couple of cursory trims, but ensuring that the liner was way higher than I needed it. And I wanted to run it first and double check that there were no problems with leaks, that the water wasn't flowing somewhere it shouldn't do, before I give it its final and last trim and conceal everything. Now, you always want to make sure that the liner is trimmed just a fraction lower than the surface of these edging stones, and that way you always ensure that the margins, the tolerances are as good as they can be, and that the pond liner is going to be a lot higher than the maximum water level of the cascade to prevent any leaks. All these areas here have been foamed in, and I could just, once I've trimmed the liner, put soil up through all these cracks and joints and conceal all of this. But I think that I want to just finish off with a very thin layer of a little bit of rapid cement. The foam, although doing a good job of holding the stones, is a little bit soft and squishy, and if this is covered in soil and plants and bits and pieces are put in here, that could eventually undermine that and sort of push that down. So if I just finish that off with a layer of something a little bit harder, I think that's going to be a bit of belt and braces and a bit more security to allow me to then pile up all the soil and conceal all these bits and pieces. Looking good though, really pleased with that. Sounds lovely. I was a bit concerned that the pump that was already here on site, this is an 8,000 litre per hour pump, an Oasa Aquamax Eco Premium 8,000. And I had wondered whether 8,000 litres was going to be enough for a pond of this scale and a cascade of this sort of size. But I think that works really well. Any more than that would probably not, sound a little bit too turbulent. It's very mesmerising when you watch water. It's like looking at fire. Very good. So I'm going to crack on addressing all this final finishing touches on the cascade, adding a few other stones and bits and pieces in here as well. And then the fun really starts when you start putting bits of moss and ferns and small macro plants in amongst all the cracks in the rocks. That's going to be a really great fun thing to do, and that will really finish this area off. There's a lot of soil, I think, that needs to be brought in still to fill up this area and bring this slope down a little bit more to make it look a bit more natural. We've got the rest of the pond over that end to finish off. I've got the edge of shelving, which will be the foundation for the paved section to complete today. A little retaining wall to put in for a marginal planting zone. So the pond's going to be emptied again one last time, back into my holding tank. We'll complete those bits and pieces. We'll give the pond a little clean, and then we can fill it up later on this afternoon for the last time. Right, well, I completed the last section of stone inside the pond, and this is the area which has been mortared into place to give it maximum strength, particularly as it was quite a small and shallow shelf. But this is the area that people are going to be standing and most likely to move stone, so they wanted to be fixed in a more permanent way. I've used rapid set cement on this just because I was a little bit impatient and wanted to get the pond filled up this afternoon. So that's setting nicely. And then over here, I've always wanted to incorporate some sort of marginal zone for planting. There never was previously. There was a few water lilies. To be honest, the pond has been so shallow for such a long time because of the leak that many of the marginals have just grown quite happily in the depths, which of course they're not going to now that the pond is going to be that much deeper. So where there was a huge island of iris over here, that's now going to be almost 3 feet deep, far too deep for marginal plants, even yellow flag irises that will tolerate much deeper water. So moving over to this area, there was already a nice contoured step marginal area that was just crying out to have a retaining stone wall here that we could then backfill with gravel. So again, I'm going to use expanding foam for this, and I've just dry laid a load of stone to the desirable sort of height. I want to make sure that this stonework finishes just a bit lower than what will be maximum water height, because I don't want to disrupt the water's surface and end up having this area as an island or sort of marooned above water level. It wants to be underwater, acting as a marginal zone rather than as a dry sort of bog area. I'm always working with a level, making sure that I've got a good idea, a good reference of what the maximum water level will be. And I reckon we're going to have about 3 inches of water or so above these stones, which is absolutely perfect. So, last couple of stones. That fits all right. Wedge them into place, and then I can get the expanding foam out and lock these into position. Good. Okay. And this is going to provide a good depth of gravel to plant into, particularly for the yellow flag irises, which is what's going in here. They're quite a tall plant, they're going to get very top heavy, so you want to make sure that they've got at least a decent depth of growing medium in which they can anchor themselves down, otherwise they'll end up just blowing and falling all over the place. So we've got sort of 6 to 8 inches or so of gravel here, getting a little bit shallow towards the back, and this area will act almost as a beach. We can put a few stones and bits and pieces above water level, a great transition for wildlife coming in and out of the pond, and aesthetically an attractive feature. As always, rock placement on top of pond liner, always use offcuts or a secondary liner of some sort to make sure you're going to cushion the main pond liner. And likewise in here, I'll cut off a sheet of excess liner to protect the main membrane when I cover this in gravel. Coming on. Right, got my foam gun. A half-used can of rock fix that hopefully is going to be enough to get this bit done. And let's get this in the joints. Now this actually works as quite a good glue on the rocks as well. Not only does it expand nicely, but you can put a nice blob of this down and sit the rock on, and actually it dries and adheres to that rock really effectively. Well, I'll do my best to carry on doing this and not plastering myself in black. I've still got the remains of last week's black on me that won't come off. That'll be there till next week. Get this done, let it go off for an hour or so, and then I can backfill with gravel and get the pond filled up. Right, if I can get in the pond without actually falling in. Oh, always got to check the soles of your shoes to make sure you don't have stones and bits of gravel caught up on the grips, because that could damage the lining. So as I've been busy building the retaining wall here for the marginal zone, Dave has been planting up all the water lilies. There was a big massive lily here already that's been split and potted on. There was one small basket originally which has broken through and sort of grown off on its own. So we've got 2 extra large baskets here and a couple of smaller ones out of that. So we can spread these around the pond, and when they come up in the summer, there'll be a good area of surface cover. It'll take a season or 2 for these lilies to really re-establish, but they're already established large pieces of lily rhizome, so they should provide plenty of leaf cover this year, and there's already some flower buds on these. Get these in the pond. They're rather heavy. Each one of these has got 25 kilos of gravel in. It's not the sunniest of positions for a pond, which means the lilies are going to suffer a little bit, particularly with flowering. There probably will be plenty of pads, but maybe not quite so much or so many flowers in the shadier positions. It's an awful lot better than it used to be. There used to be a very large cherry tree here which was really overshadowing the pond, and a few years back that was taken out, and that's really opened up the pond and changed it dramatically for the better. But probably in the deeper section underneath the overhanging holly here, it won't get quite as much light as they'd like. Now all these plants, these water lilies, have been potted on simply in a 10mm shingle. No aquatic compost, just a gravel. And this works very well as a planting medium. It allows the roots from the water lily to grow through quite happily. And the mesh baskets like this allow the fine fibrous roots from the lily to grow through the basket in search of additional nutrients and oxygenated water. Some of the fabric baskets that you see, particularly recommended for water lilies, actually can be a bit too confining for plants and can stagnate. It stops the roots from growing through and getting the little pockets of oxygen they need and the nutrients they need. So much better to have a traditional mesh basket for deep water plants like this. The gravel also acts as a very good ballast to weigh the plants down, because when lilies get quite established, the rhizome and the pads can become very buoyant and they can end up lifting the plant to the surface. So having a hefty pot like that helps to keep it down at the bottom. Now we don't want to place lilies too close to the cascade, because water lilies are a little bit fussy in terms of water movement. They don't want to have splashing water on the leaves if you can help it. They don't mind very, very slow currents, so they'll grow in canals, for example, which are flowing but very, very slowly. But it certainly doesn't want to be anywhere turbulent or near a splash zone. There we go. I think that'll do nicely. Now I've just given this foam a bit of a prod, and it's already developed a nice skin. So we're at the position where I can give this front section a good tidy up by manipulating and pushing into the cracks a lot of this foam which is oozed out all over the place. And then if there's too much, then you can just break it or cut it away. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's becoming quite a nice sunny day. And I don't know if it's getting picked up on the camera or not, but I keep hearing an owl hooting away. Sadly, I've not heard the cuckoo since we first heard it last week. Yep, that's fixed these stones nicely. So I've squished the foam in at the front. There's a few areas here that I'm just going to brush off and clean up, but again, when that's underwater and there's a bit of algae growing on that, none of that's going to be visible, and that's the beauty of having a black foam. Some offcuts of pond liner to lay down and protect the main pond liner. Make sure there are no stones or other sharp bits and pieces that are going to be caught between the main lining and the secondary lining. And then we can cover this in gravel, which is going to transform it. So when you're building your pond, right at the beginning, when you cut your excess liner, always save that, because those offcuts that you get are very, very useful for this kind of work. And that's it, that piece is big enough. You can get this covered in gravel. Ready for the gravel, and I'm ready for a second lunch and a cup of tea. I am always thinking of my stomach. I'm a growing lad, David. Just growing in the wrong way. Marginal zone has been created, filled with gravel and planted up with some of this yellow flag iris. Pond has been drained of the last of the water, and Dave's just picking up all of the stones and crap and mud that's fallen in. Water lily baskets have been rinsed through because that gravel was a bit dusty. And I've just been going around and trimming the secondary layer of pond liner, which is there to cushion the rock work of all the excess. I don't want to get too close to the edge. A little flap like this is okay as long as it's kept nice and neat and tidy. The stonework looks lovely when it's been wetted down and the sun's on it. Takes on a lovely colour. That switch box up there to the top right of the cascade needs to be concealed. Plant in front of that just to hide it. But we're nearly at the position where we can do the final fill. This is a lovely position to view the pond. Today marks the end of the pond restoration, but we've still got some more work to tackle, and the next stage of the job is going to be paving this concrete hard standing, and in the process removing this bench that's been here for many years. It's a lovely thing, it's got lots of character with this slate top, but it's very, very cold on the bum, and perhaps aesthetically, especially with the brickwork, not the prettiest of things. So we can improve upon that. We'll get rid of this. This area is going to be paved with just some simple Indian sandstone, some sort of mute colours, Raj green, autumn brown, and that's going to blend in very nicely with the woodland scenery of the garden and the natural stonework of the pond. And then in each place here, just a nice simple wooden bench, a curved mahogany banana bench or something will sit quite nicely. It's been a great job to do. It's been a beautiful garden to work in. Been very, very lucky with the weather. Every day, apart from one, I think, has been like this. So it'll be sad to see the end of this job. Cascade's running, looks beautiful. I'll show you what we've been up to. So the marginal zone, filled with some yellow flag iris. And there's the lovely cascade, with the morning sun glinting on the water. I think this is just the perfect setting for a cascade like this. Nice and natural. The use of reclaiming a lot of the old stonework that's covered in moss and lichen and bits and pieces really helps to blend all this in. I love that use of that large rock there, which for years has gone sort of hidden in the undergrowth, and just bringing it out. It's got so much character, that stone. And a lovely flow. So I've got a few bits and pieces to just pocket in amongst the cracks of the stonework. One of my favourite staple plants, Mind Your Own Business, will go beautifully in the splash zone of the cascade. But this is the area we'll be focusing on today. Now, before we get to the stage where we can lay any slabs, this area needs to be levelled out a little bit. The whole thing slopes, there has to be a runoff, but it slopes down this way, but there's some uneven levels. I wanted to make sure that this band of stone here was as level as it could be, and that the internal stonework didn't follow this natural drop, because that compared to the water would really start to look a little bit askew. You always want to try to make sure that the level of the pond on a paved section is as level as it can be. So here the stonework is considerably higher than the concrete hard standing, and over here it's pretty much level. So there's a few areas here that are going to have to be sort of screed off and filled up before we can start to lay those slabs. So initially I'm going to start by filling these lower voids here with a mix of rapid set cement, just to bring this level up a little bit. That'll go off in less than an hour, and then we can start to think about laying some slabs and getting them cut. It's going to be tricky to follow this nice contour and curve of the pond. In fact, all of this is going to be curved, but it will look beautiful when it's done.
I don't really know what comes next. I'm just doing my best, even though I'm so stressed out. Everything just feels like a test that I fail, so depressed when I can't seem to get out. But something deep inside won't let me quit. I swear that I'm inspired by all this shit. Tell me that I can and I won't. That's what guides me the most. Your lies, I'll do what I want.
So I'm approaching the last few slabs of this paved area. It's looking nice now, very pleased with this. It really finishes this part of the pond off. There's barely a straight edge on any of this, lots of sweeping curves. And the way I've been creating these curves and sort of marking them off is very simply with a piece of old garden hose. It's very useful using hose as a template or a guide that you can lay down into a certain position and draw over. So I'm just going to offer up these slabs in their final resting position. And I want to maintain this curve round here. Like so. Let's see, I think that looks all right. Mark it off with a pencil, and this is the section I cut off. Easy peasy. So all these slabs are getting laid on a full base of mortar. None of this 5 dabs of mortar malarkey, and that ensures that the slabs are bedded in properly for a long, durable finish. This is a 4-to-1 mix, 2 parts sharp, 2 parts soft to 1 part cement with a little bit of plasticizer mixed in. There we go. Let's offer up that slab. Now the benefits of having a full bed of mortar, it's not just that the stone or the slab itself is going to be sitting on a nice full bed, which obviously is going to improve the overall integrity of the patio, but it's also when it comes to pointing. If you've only got little dabs of cement, there's a lot of voids and empty spaces underneath, which when you then start to fill up with your pointing, the pointing's not really biting into anything. So this is going to ensure that you just have a much stronger finish, stronger bond. Now when I'm holding the slabs, I take the gloves off, because the gloves have got a habit of picking up dirt and cement, which transfers onto the slabs, which particularly when they're wet, because I've just cut them, is going to stain. There's always a little bit of cement and muck that will end up on the stones, and I'll have a wet sponge or a wet paintbrush to hand so that I can just quickly clean that off as well as I go. Just using a standard mallet, rubber mallet, to get these knocked into place. And I'm now paying careful attention to the levels and the falls. This paved area has levels all over the place. It's got a fall this way and a fall this way, and as we come to this end it's got a bit of a slope down this way as well. And actually this stone had started off as one big piece, a 600 by 600 square, but as I was laying it I realised that I wouldn't be able to have a fall that way, and then these front slabs need to slope down to ground level, a fall this way. So I've cut that stone in 2, and that ensures that from this bond onwards I can slope these stones down slightly. There we go. So with just a little wet paintbrush, I'm going to brush off any bits of muck that's got on the slab, which is potentially going to stain it. Like making a cake. For you home DIYers, what Dave's using there to mix up the cement is a little paddle mixer. And it's a heck of a lot more convenient for mixing up small loads that we're using, rather than using a big cement mixer. Something like that only costs about £60. It's portable, it packs up small, and it's very easy to clean the paddles when you've finished. So a very useful piece of kit when you're doing jobs such as this. Now, as well as the level, just running your hands between the stones to feel the joints between the two is a really good indicator as to whether or not you're proud or too low. As long as you can't feel any particular lumps and bumps, then you're okay. Now, obviously, using natural stone like this, they've got ribbon edges and they've got natural character to the stone, bits and pieces that might be a little bit higher or a bit lower, so you have to work with that. So apart from the pointing we've got to do today, it really is just the finishing touches, a little bit of liner to tidy up here, a couple of plants to put in there, a bit of soil and gravel filled in here and there, and then really this job will be finished. Right, this is the last piece of the puzzle, the last stone to go down. I don't reckon I've got enough cement. What an art! I'll have to hand mix just a little bit more. Yeah, that's too low. Well, isn't that always the way on the last piece? Dave? Dave was busy, so I've had to knock up a little bit of muck all by myself. Here we go, last little bit. Now this last stone has a very steep fall to try to marry up with the path that carries on. We don't want to have any little steps or trip hazards. Running wheelbarrows over and things like that, you want to think about this when you're building paving or pathways. I reckon that's about it. Now, when you're offering the slabs up on their bed of mortar, you want to make sure that they're sitting proud, so that once you've knocked it in, it beds itself in nicely into the mortar below. There we go. That's the last stone. Now we've got to get a lot of cleaning up to do. Brush down all these slabs. I'll get the leaf blower out so we can then blow out all of the joints and make sure there's no dust and loose debris. And then we'll get this whole area pointed up. And here we have the finished paving. Now obviously it needs to be cleaned down. We've got to repoint it, or not repoint it, we've got to point it. And that really does finish this off nicely. But this is going to be a lovely seating area. It looks an awful lot bigger now it's been paved and now the stones span right up to the edge of the pond. Taking away that old brick bench with the slate top, I think was a wise move. Got space here for a couple of sun loungers. Very nice. And not a straight line on this. Well, apart from every straight line and the slabs, but we'll ignore those. So there we go. Spend the rest of the day on our hands and knees getting this pointed up. So this is the fun task of pointing, or grouting, or jointing. Which one do you call it, Dave?
Pointing.
Pointing, there you go. So we're filling the joints. This is a slightly stronger mix than we use for laying the slabs on. This is a 3-to-1 mix. 2 parts soft, 1 part sharp to 1 part cement, again with a little bit of plasticizer. And this is mixed, so it's just got a little bit of moisture in it, just enough that you can kind of squeeze it together. Keeping it that dry means we're not going to stain the slabs, and it means that we can almost sort of brush it into the joints, compact it down, and then we can trowel over it and finish it off. This is always a nice part of the job, certainly for the first day or so. As we can have a bit of a rest, can't we?
Yep, gets boring then.
Put some music on. And enjoy it. Nearly there. So the idea is that you're filling all of the joints, all of the voids, and making sure that all of the mortar is well packed down. So sort of building it up in layers and compacting it down as we go. Now if it was wetter than this, you could not afford to be anywhere near as sort of slapdash as this. But keeping it on the drier side means you can move it around on the slabs quite happily without any marks. Now we're just going over and sort of giving the joints a cursory fill, and then once they're up to level, we just get a little brush over, making sure that everything is filled flush or slightly higher if you're doing sort of peak pointing. If there are any little holes that you can see where it's not quite filled up sufficiently, now's the time to do it. These little trowels are fantastic. We've got a mixture of different pointing trowels, gauging trowels, 3 different sizes of these little pointing trowels, which over the years have worn to a lovely sort of curved smooth edge, so they're lovely tools to use. And then simply getting the tool slightly damp, you can just float over this edge to neaten it up. Now you could leave it like that, and when that dries, that will be quite a sort of smooth, almost polished, very heavily troweled surface. I'm not too keen on that. I've got a little bit of grit in this mix as well, and I like to roughen up the surface just a little bit. So when this is nearly dried off, I'll go over this with a very fine brush just to lose that very smooth trowel effect. There we go. Well, we've got a little bit more to go. Making great progress. Another hour, I reckon, and that'll be that. Well, there we go. That's it. Pointed, brushed down. Just needs to fully harden, and then I can come back and give this a good clean. Doesn't really want to be walked on for at least 24 hours, and then probably only very light traffic for 48 hours or so. It would be quite easy to scuff up some of this pointing. If you've got pets, always be very wary. Absolute classic, you're going to end up with dog prints or cat prints on this, so keep them away. If it's really hot and sunny, it needs to be covered lightly. Of course, if it's going to rain, it needs to be covered. And if it was going to be cold and frosty, it needs to be covered. But the weather at the moment is absolutely perfect, so we don't need to worry about any of that. So we really are drawing to the end of this job. It's just the finishing touches, a bit of a clean here, a bit of soil or a rock here and there, readjusting the old plant. But I'm happy with this. I think this paved area really finishes off the pond nicely, and it's going to be a lovely place to come and sit and admire the cascade at the end of the pond. And there we go. I'm very pleased. It's not a bad spot to sit, is it? Very nice. And what a lovely day to end this job on. I always say this on videos, I'm very fortunate that I get to do a lot of work on ponds and properties with clients that I've worked with for many years. And so it's always really nice to be able to see a pond through its various stages and transitions. And I've always had a bit of a soft spot for this pond because it's such an interesting shape. You know, it bucks the typical kidney-shaped pond trend, and it's got some lovely curves. So it was a nice pond for me to get my hands dirty on and to get involved in. And I think just having this beautiful surrounding sort of woodland and fantastic gardens is just the icing on the cake for this. Really finishes it off nicely. Well, I've got a couple of little jobs I want to do just to finish up this morning. I'm going to skim the surface of the pond just to get rid of some of the debris and a bit of duckweed, and add a couple of pond treatments to the pond, a little bit of cloverleaf blanket on, so just to help to prevent the inevitable blanket weed bloom that's going to occur from the addition of some of the tap water that's gone into the pond. Thanks very much for watching and for taking part in this journey with me. I always enjoy documenting these projects, and it's touching that people like yourselves want to view them and watch them. So thank you. If you enjoy any sort of pond related topics, then check out some of my older videos, and please like and subscribe. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next pond.